Okay. It's one of the unknown advantages of using a UV filter. Now, I made a bunch of videos talking about why, especially on an expensive prime lens, to use a UV filter. Obviously, the UV filter is not needed on current digital cameras, but it is as an anti-reflective coating, like an HMC or B&W stuff is a bit too expensive. The best value for your money is an anti-reflective coating, Hoya Multicoat, which is an anti-reflective coating. It's a vacuum deposited crystalline coating. There is a cheaper version of the B&W UV filter for prophylactic protection of your expensive lenses, be they zoom or prime. However, they're called platinum lenses. They're actually made by Sunpack. Sunpack has been making filters for decades now. They're actually sold at Best Buy. It is amazing that something is actually extremely well, is extremely good product that's sold at Best Buy, because typically it's all tourist grade junk, but it is actually an excellent filter. They're marked platinum, but they're made by Sunpack, and they are exquisite filters. Now, we've gone over the debates as far as the prophylactic advantages or disadvantages thereof, and I made videos proving that in most situations a prophylactic UV filter, and it doesn't have to be a UV filter, will protect your lens. I did demonstrations where I tried to destroy lenses. I did with and without, and I showed that the UV filter protected the lenses, especially here on the beach. Getting grit in the front element or sea spray is an issue. Getting the grit out is basically impossible. Getting the sea spray off later obviously is easy, but it is the case that that vacuum deposited crystalline coating that's either on the filter or on the front element of your lens, whatever that be, a Zeiss, a Nikkor, it doesn't matter what the hell it is, that is sensitive to perpetual cleaning. And this is something else you won't read about by some of these asshats telling you that, well, I have this expensive Zeiss lens. Well, that's fine. If it's a studio use, who gives a damn? It's a house, it's a house pet. So obviously you don't need a filter there. But any outdoor use, it is the case that perpetual cleaning is going to remove that anti-reflective coating. It is not meant, as any lens manufacturer will tell you, whether it be Zeiss, Canon, Nikkor, Voigtlander, it doesn't matter who it is, they will all tell you the same thing, and that is necessitatively the case. But here's two things that you won't read about that a UV filter does. You'll notice, like if you shoot some heavy beach scenes like this, where you get 80% of the scene, bright beach, white sand being reflected back, a lot of the light being reflected back, it is the case that people notice if they're walking on the beach that they'll get UV sunburns up underneath their undercarriage, shall we say, if they're wearing loose clothing, from reflected UV light, whether it's UVA or UVB. And people will notice, especially on certain prime lenses, and one of the big culprits is an array of lenses that I have, but a bad culprit, and I mean bad relatively speaking. Most people aren't shooting on the beach like this. That if you're shooting the Takina 100mm, you have to compensate for a bright beach scene. Typically by 3/4 or often a stop, and a lot of you report that as well, and that is of course the case. The reason for that is, and I do not use the UV filter on my Takina, because the front element is so heavily recessed and I'm not worried about ever impacting it. But it is the case that that UV light is electromagnetic spectrum radiation. Remember, light is a coaxial circuit. It does impact the sensor and tell it that there is a certain exposure that doesn't render out in the image, and that is why you have to have exposure compensation. So this is advantage number one of a UV filter that you will not read about anywhere else, and you will not see anywhere else on YouTube. Okay? And the second advantage is that UV causes a scattering and a dispersion of blue in spectrum light. So if you have a heavy blue light heavy blue reflected light, blue building, whatever the case it is, you're shooting a model against a brightly lit blue wall, okay, and you're not using a UV filter. There is, of course, you can take care of this in post. It is the case that UV light actually disperses blue in spectrum light. So there are two advantages, or there are three total, obviously. There's prophylactic protection of your lens, which I've gone over ad nauseum. But two other advantages of a UV filter on your lens is that it actually compensates for the necessitated correction on a wide variety of lenses because your sensor does pick up on that coaxial UV spectrum light depending on which lens it is, especially if it's a low element count prime like the Kina and many others. It actually removes that light from striking the sensor and causing a compensation issue correction. Is that really a big deal? Well, it's a bit of a pain in the crotch, but you have 3 different layers of protection by using a UV filter, 2 of which you won't read about anywhere else. Why doesn't anybody talk about this stuff? Who knows? Most people don't know anything about light or what that sensor does. There are obviously pass filters in front of your sensor, but UV is high energy coaxial light. It's the same way with X-rays. The more powerful the light is, the more penetrative it is. X-rays, you know, basically will go through anything other than lead. Actually, strong enough amperage X-rays will go through lead also. Obviously, you can find full spectrum conversion Nikons. They're basically like old Nikon D90s and other cameras that have been converted. That they do is they take them apart and they take off the pass filters that sit in front of the sensor. Now, it is the case if I add an R72 filter to the front of this lens or any other lens that it's blocking out most of the visible light, but I do have an infrared block filter that's sitting in front of this Nikon D750 sensor. And the rest of your sensors, that's that little filter that looks green. When you look in at your DSLR sensor, that green looking image that you think's the sensor is not the sensor. That's actually a filter. So obviously, even though that filter is present, if I do a time exposure using R72 or whatever infrared filter, then I'm actually bringing infrared light to the sensor, but I'm just saturating it. I'm allowing a certain amount to pass through that. And it also is the case that ultraviolet light does pass to your sensor and causes an exposure compensation issue, especially with bright light scenes like this. So those are 2 unknown advantages. They're not unknown to me, but they're unknown to everybody else that's out there. Why don't you read about this in books? Why don't you read about this in photography magazines? Why won't you read about this crap on YouTube or watch a video about it? Well, you're seeing it now, and that is the case. It is irrefutable and undeniable. Okay? So I'm glad I was going to tell you those 2 things. I've been meaning to make. Ooh, God bless spandex. Oh my God. Excuse me. This is the beach. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.